Here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first in an ongoing series of virtual sharing and learning webinars. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Drew Wagner. I'm a member of the Monalog Collective group, and I'm the host for this program. Let me tell you a little bit about the group before we get started. Monalog Collective is a group of black and white film photographers who create images using traditional wet printing methods and materials, such as silver gelatin paper or alternative processes with chemicals they mix and papers they coat themselves. We are like-minded photographers from a wide variety of backgrounds operating at a high skill level. We have formed to promote black and white analog photography and the industry that supports it. We foster the growth of our community through membership and engagement with others, individually and through broader collaborative activity. All member prints are original and handmade using a wide variety of analog processes. This program, entitled Your COVID-19 Photographic Life, will be an intimate discussion with Monalog members Michael Marks, David Haas, and Paul Margolis. Please use the chat window to post your questions during the presentation. There will be no audio for your questions. After each presentation, we will answer as many of your questions as possible within the allotted time. Okay, let's begin. Michael, our first presenter is Michael Marks. Michael is the founder of Monalog Collective and is passionately dedicated to the analog black and white photography through teaching and lecturing, writing a weekly blog, exhibiting, and continually learning through classes and workshops. Okay, Michael, let's get started.
All right, well, thanks for having me, and welcome everyone. I'm glad to be here. So I'm Michael Marks. I'm a black and white film photographer. I primarily do candid work, street photography. That would be street photography, documentary work, and I also do some urban landscapes. That's primarily what I do. I've been making photographs for over 50 years, primarily using 35mm cameras and medium format rangefinder cameras as well. You know, COVID pandemic, I think has been a real challenge for all photographers, including myself. And so for the work that I like to do, which is to mainly get close to people on the street to make photographs, you know, that was a little bit challenging. So I sort of wanted to see if there was something else I could do. And I didn't want to just sit around doing nothing. And so I decided that I wanted to create a portfolio of work that dealt with empathy, empathetic behavior and signs of empathy around where I live in Bucks County and Pennsylvania. And that's what I did. And I created a portfolio of about 20 images over a several month period last year when the pandemic was just really getting going and really rearing its ugly head. I probably made several hundred images, but I chose about 20 to tell this story. And I think there's probably 6 or 7 that you're gonna see here today. I think that because I had to think differently about the kind of work that I wanted to do this project, that it was good for me in terms of stretching me a little bit, and I think it added and will have add to my my sort of creativity going forward. It certainly did for the rest of the year it's gone by, because I've made many more photographs since then. Um, um, I think the other thing that was important for me during this time was to keep my head in the game and to try to continue to live what I call and what I've taught, which is living a photographic life. Because even if you can't be out there photographing for whatever the reason is, you still wanna keep thinking about it, keep doing it, keep living photographically. And so one of the things that I did during this period of time was I bought a lot of books, and I read a lot of books, and I studied a lot from the books that I bought. And of course I looked at a lot of the books that I owned as well. So that helped continue to maintain my interest level, and hopefully inform my creativity. So that's sort of what I've done in the last year photographically. So I'm ready if you want to show some pictures. Okay. So this is one of the first photographs that I made probably last February, I think, here in Doylestown, where I live. And this is a picture of two people that own a distillery not far from where I live. And what they did was um, they they decided, given everything that was going on, that they were going to turn their distillery, Hume Spirits, into a hand sanitizer factory. And that's what they did. And they were giving out, not samples, they were giving out free bottles of sanitizer for anybody that needed it and that was passing by. So that's what that picture was. Okay, next. Okay, the next photograph was made in Doylestown on the doorstep of my favorite used record store. And I literally got down on the ground, to make this photograph. It's a picture of a drop off for people that wanted to get free bottles of hand sanitizer, most likely made by the two gentlemen that you saw in the first picture. And they could also drop off their empty bottles when they were done. So that was, again, people working with other people to try to make things better and safer. Okay, next. This is a photograph that I made last Easter in my neighborhood. Two of my neighbors that had dressed up in Easter bunny suits. And their idea was that they're standing in their driveway, and they were going to go around the neighborhood and greet little kids and maybe adults too, and try to cheer them up on a day that wasn't really a normal Easter, for people that celebrate that holiday. So I saw that and I wanted to make that photograph. Okay. Here's a picture outside of my favorite Italian restaurant near where I live on Route 611, and Dominic's Pizzeria. And I looked into the window and I saw one of the owners making pizza, and I knocked on the window and I asked her if she would come closer. One of the doors was open, and there's like a screen door behind it to let the fresh air come in. And so she's standing next to the pizza oven. I made a photograph of her. Okay. The next photograph is also on 611, not far from where I live. And this is a photograph I saw while I was driving my car one day of it's a building where there's a printing shop located in it. And this printing shop had made these large, very large posters depicting a healthcare worker. And the idea was that they wanted to thank, those in the local community that were doing their best to, keep everyone safe and keep people alive during this horrible time. So I saw that photograph, that picture, and I wanted to make it. Okay, next. This photograph was taken really on the last weekend of my project on Memorial Day. And Doylestown has one of the longest running, if not the longest running, Memorial Day parade in the United States. But this year, the official parade couldn't take place for obvious reasons. But some of the parents and children in our neighborhood organized this parade. And I found out about it about 15 minutes before it was about ready to start. One of my neighbors mentioned it to me. So I was outside, I ran home, got my camera, ran to where it was going to be, and just in time to make this photograph, which to me says a lot. The official parade couldn't take place, but these kids weren't going to be thwarted from enjoying Memorial Day and the spirit of Memorial Day. And so I'm very happy about this photograph. Okay, next. And this is the final print that I'd like to show, picture. This was made also around that weekend, and it was taken on, it's a photograph of a driveway in my neighborhood. And the children that lived in that house, with chalk, made this, this sign or this message on their driveway that you're not alone in this horrible time. And I think that sort of is a good way to sort of bring this project, to an end. And it sort of says, it shows the empathy that, even young children that may not have understood the full gravity of, what was going on, they still wanted to, bring this message forward. So I enjoyed doing this work, and it means a lot to me. Thank you.
Okay, Michael, thank you. We had a couple questions came in.
Okay.
So the first one is, did you learn anything new or broaden your horizons in terms of the type of photographs you made during the COVID-19 period?
Yeah, it's sort of because of, the fact that you had to socially distance yourself when you were out there, you couldn't get as close to people as you'd like to. And that's usually how I operate. I'm usually just a couple feet away, when I'm making a photograph, but this time was different. And so I was looking, I wasn't really on the hunt for pictures of people, but I did find some, and there I had to be further away from them. But I felt that I was still able to get the types of photographs that I wanted, at least for this application. But it also caused me to be looking for other signs of things, in this case, empathy, that didn't necessarily include people in the photograph. And I was able to capture those things. And I think that sort of broadened my horizons, I think. And it made me think about, the types of pictures that, I want to take going forward. And in fact, I ended up going forward with, in a number of cases, for the rest of this year. And I've made a lot of photographs this year, it's turned out. So it's all been good.
Okay. We have a question about your books. Which was your favorite book, or which book had the most influence on you?
Yeah, well, as I said, I bought a lot of books and spent a lot of money on books, but it was money well spent. A couple that sort of stand out for me was a 2-volume set published by the National Gallery of Art, I think, containing all of their holdings of Stieglitz, Alfred Stieglitz photographs. It's a huge double volume set of hundreds and hundreds of photographs. It's just phenomenal. I feel lucky to have it. Of course, Stieglitz was one of the great photographers of the 20th century. Another book that was really, I'm just really excited to have gotten it, is a book called Magnum Contact Sheets, and it was published by the great, Magnum Collective agency that includes many of the great, documentary street photographers of our times. And it's all it is pages of these wonderful photographers' proof sheets, and they're marked up with red Sharpies, so you can see here's their 35 millimeter roll of film that they took, and here's like the one or two pictures that they chose or the editors chose, and it's an incredible book, an incredible learning tool. So those
Great.
are two examples. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Sure thing.
That concludes our first presentation. Our next presenter is Paul Margolis. While documentary photography and fine art photography have always been Paul's first loves, his background includes working as an editor, teacher, photojournalist, and commercial photographer. Recent projects include documenting individuals who reenact 20th century wars, political demonstrations in New York City, and everyday life in Israel. Paul, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Drew, and thank you everybody who tuned in. As Drew mentioned, I'm a documentary photographer, primarily a people photographer. I work for the most part with 35 millimeter black and white films of various types and speeds. And my work during COVID was are we not working, Drew?
We're all good.
Oh, it's good. Okay, excellent. That my work during the time of COVID has been documenting the new reality of life in New York City, of the effects of the pandemic here. And I've been in Manhattan throughout the entire time. I barely left Manhattan Island. And when the pandemic got really bad in March and April, basically I hid out. But by late April and early May, I decided that I just didn't want to be shut in anymore. And being as careful as I could with masks and gloves, I went out to photograph. And the work that you'll see is from what I call phase one of my Plague Days project. That's from early May to late December, the period when things were first very bad, got a little bit better, then there was a spike in the fall again. And that's the period that I covered in this photography. So let's start the pictures, please. Okay, in early May, I photographed this group of kids. This street, this happens to be West End Avenue in Manhattan. A number of streets were blocked so that people had extra areas to get out of their apartments and walk around and still stay distanced from one another. And these kids set up a boom box in the street, no traffic, and just started a dance routine. And I asked if I could photograph them. Next slide, please. And I live across the street from Central Park, which has really been a lifesaver for me because it's allowed me to get out and also to do some interesting photographs, like this gentleman who was fishing in a little pond in the park. Next, please. And I was wandering around one afternoon with my medium format camera and saw this just married couple. So I told them that if they would pose for me, I would give them a genuine black and white picture. So this is a newly married couple in the street. Next picture. And this gentleman is the superintendent of one of the apartment buildings near where I was. And he has his Harley and his American flag and his cobbled together mask with the stars and stripes on it. Next picture. In Manhattan, and I'm told other places, every night at 7 o'clock through most of the spring and summer, there would be a salute to the healthcare workers. And this gentleman, who was an unemployed bagpiper because his pipe band could no longer perform, every evening at 7 o'clock, he would give a rendition of Amazing Grace on his bagpipes. And there would sometimes be a crowd, sometimes just one person, like this woman standing and watching. But next picture, please. As we got into the summer and the protests over Black Lives Matters issues, I photographed these two monks who were holding up a sign, who were part of the demonstration. Next picture. And in the summer, when the infection rates went down somewhat and businesses were able to open, restaurants could serve people out of doors, I photographed these women having dinner on the terrace on Amsterdam Avenue. So next slide. And businesses adapted to social distancing, to masking, and to other hygienic rules, like this nail salon, where you can see both the customer and the, I guess, manicurist are masked, and there's a plexiglass screen between them. So next picture. In Central Park, this woman what am I saying? Painted the street scene, the scene of apartment buildings, and unfortunately you can't see it in black and white, but this was in October when the leaves were beautiful, fall colors. So she's there, masked and gloved and working at her easel in the park. Next picture. There is, not so far from me, an African market where there are all sorts of crafts and clothing and various other African products. And this gentleman had a little booth where he turned out dresses and shirts and other cloth objects, and he was nice enough to let me photograph him. Next picture. And one of the activities that seemed to grow up in the park was people feeding these little birds that would perch on people's hands and take seeds out of their hands. And this gentleman was feeding the little birds in the park. Yeah. Next picture. And at Christmas time, you can see in the background there a large plastic Santa Claus that's over an outdoor cellar of Christmas trees. And this scene of the homeless guy and the guy walking with his miniature Christmas tree and assiduously avoiding looking at the guy begging was just sort of a New York in winter scene during the pandemic. And sort of a little social statement, all caught there on 35 millimeter frame. And next slide. This was at the very end of the year, the end of what I call phase 1 of my Plague Days project. These are a series of these heads with the masks on them, masks in different styles being sold on the street, with the 2021 New Year's celebration headpieces on them. This picture sort of marks the end both of the year of 2020, a horrible enough year, and also the end of what I call the first phase 1 of my project. In the next part going forward, this has been an ongoing project for me and will go on for me as long as the pandemic or the effects of the pandemic are still happening. This is the phase of massive infection, of the city shut down, of economic upheaval. And the phase that I'm working on now, I call phase 2, the recovery phase, where the vaccine has become more available, where social and business restrictions are being lifted a bit, and New York is sort of slowly coming back from the chaos and upheaval caused by the pandemic. So that's the final picture from this series.
Okay, Paul, thank you. We have a couple questions that came in for you.
Okay.
The first one says, why do you still use film when digital is so much easier and more convenient?
Well, when I have lectured on my photography, I've gotten this question a couple of times. And if I don't want to get into a whole explanation about being part of a 140-year, or actually 180-year historical continuum, or the archival properties or anything like that, I simply say, film makes me happier than digital. And I worked with digital. I worked for the city of New York as a photographer and writer, where I had to use that newfangled digital and video. But when I retired, I tell people I retired to black and white. So,
okay,
retired to film, rather.
the second question: have you ever been threatened or attacked while taking someone's photograph?
I've never been attacked. I'm quite happy to say that. So far in 45 years, I have not been physically attacked, and I'm very grateful for that. I have been yelled at. I've been threatened on several occasions. Fortunately, nothing too serious ever came of it. I also learned something. One of the very valuable lessons of people photography, especially candid people photography, is learning to abjectly apologize, to say, oh no, of course I wasn't photographing you. I was photographing that park bench, that tree, that stop sign. I'm terribly sorry if you thought that I might have been photographing you. But very often, I have to say, to add to that, as part of this project, this Plague Days project, I've gotten a lot braver. I now just go up to people in their masks, or masked families, or being out masked and gloved walking the dog, and say, you know, what you're doing looks really interesting, or you look really interesting. Do you mind if I take your picture? And 9 out of 10 times, people are perfectly amenable, and I give them one of my business cards and tell them I will send them an image. So basically, so far, nothing too serious has ever happened to me. So far.
Okay, all right. That's great, Paul. That concludes our second presentation. Our next presenter is David Haas. David is an academically trained photographer with BFA and MFA degrees who has been working as a fine art printer for many well-published photographers for decades. Since 1996, he has been teaching analog photography in several universities and conducting printing and photographic techniques and processes workshops in his studio darkroom. Additionally, David is contracted with the National Park System, the HABS, HARE, and HOWLS programs, which includes documentations of roadways, buildings, natural resources, and historic features. David,
Take it away.
you're up, David.
I'm glad to have you here. A photographer, a black and white photographer who learned it as an activity at summer camp, and then for various reasons, it just never went away. My dad built me a dark room and bought me a camera, and I just, from an early age, had this notion of being a photographic artist. And at one point, actually, when I started my academic career, I figured I'd have to actually get a degree in film or video to earn money to support my photography. But fortunately, when I went to art school, I met people and I found opportunities that led me to a career just doing black and white photography. I've done some color. I've shot 35mm, 2.25, 4.5, 5.7, and even 8.10. But as of now, I've kind of settled in on 4x5, and most of the teaching is done 35. It's intro to analog, they call it now. Used to be photo 1, but it's intro to analog. But no, I've enjoyed the educational aspects of it, and the commercial end of it. I don't consider it commercial. It's like I've gotten commissions from the Park Service rather than grants or fellowships or things. So, and I feel those commissions to go photograph our national parks have been just as rewarding as career in commercial photography. And it's a shared experience with the students and people like yourselves, the people, the artists that come to me and need my printing services. So it's been a kind of a four-pronged, very rewarding, approach to photography. And it's still just to be relevant, and leading into the COVID experience, because the teaching is going to be part of the presentation, to be back. I'm teaching again in person in a darkroom on campus, and going forward, that I'm looking forward to it more than ever. So anyway, first slide up there, or first image. So going back a year ago, about this time before Easter, we were just coming back from spring break. And actually, we got all the students back from spring break just to tell them that they had to go home again. But fortunately, in that first month, I was able to get the cameras in the kids' hands. They understood how to expose film. And it was, for me, frustrating because I ended up processing all their film and printing it for them. That really wasn't frustrating, I should say. The knowledge that they had the camera and the ability to do it at home, because in a normal semester, all I see are photographs from a very small geographic location on campus. And to have them all go home with their cameras and come back with pictures during the beginnings of this COVID experience was really interesting. This was one of the first, northern New Jersey somewhere, I think it was. And I kind of put these titles on, I call it Which Way. In all honesty, I've never seen two roadsides pointing in the same direction like this. And, who's supposed to go where? So it's kind of a metaphor. And referencing Michael's point about contact sheets, that's always been a pleasure for me, is seeing their contact sheets, fresh eyes. And you can go to the next slide. And some of their, let me say, abstract ideas of composition and stuff, you know, because I would say the signage and details, and I like the little arrow up there, 24 hours, and you know how they put pictures together. It all shows up on the contact sheet, and they have their expectations. But as a teacher, you know, I look at it, you know, from a different perspective, an academic, you know, formal, was form and content and all that. And so they had a project, a unified project, and came back with some really interesting image. Next slide, please. You know, the policeman is just, you know, with the little girl, and you know, the man to his right. There's a certain emotion, or say, the policeman seems like a threatening presence, but then the little girl, you know, and the father, they kind of balance it out. And you know, these are untrained eyes, and it's, you know, fun to see what they come back with. This was taken in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Next one, please. So in a way, you know, I feel these are my images because I inspire them to go out and take them, and it's fun to see what they come back with. This was the niece of one of my students, and you know, just there's a certain sadness in her eyes, and I like the depth of field, you know, and the focus is on the eyes, the mask, the ears, the, you know, two pair of ears. Next image, please. And then the one I like called Jonestown, because if you were around back when they published images of, you know, all the people who committed suicide down there, well, it's kind of a, you know, that's all I can think about when I see this image. And then the language that's around, you know, the stop sign, the do not enter sign, and then over everything is Starbucks, and everybody's pretending, I guess, to be dead. Next, please. And I guess this is the last in the series of student work. This is, even though the two women inside the window do not have their masks on, they're quarantined together. It's the mother and the daughter, should say the grandmother, the mother, and then the daughter is taking a picture from outside the window, and the expressions and the baby cup. I mean, it's all, she's sitting in a wheelchair. All the information is there, but it's layered. And this is, I always like to say, with referencing digital, you know, we always work in layers, in black and white. If you work like reflection, there's so much depth, then it's either right in front of you or it's a half a block away, and you can get it all on one sheet of film. You know, you don't have to go through digital programming. So the teaching kind of came to an end with the summer session. I didn't do it in the fall just because I couldn't have access to my darkroom. They gave me the darkroom back for the spring. So as I said earlier, I'm back in the darkroom. So, and I've got a full class scheduled for the fall. So, you know, lots of positives on that end. Then on the other side of it, the next one, please. The historic documentary photography, I was able to complete a couple of jobs I had been contracted to do in 2019, which were put on hold, but then for the need to get the jobs underway, because they're always with these historic documentary jobs, they call them Section 106 jobs. There's a point where they can't do any more until I take the photographs. So this bridge, the Harry Nice Potomac down in Maryland, needed documentation before it gets torn down. And I would say it got to the point where I had to go and photograph. So with the mask on, I had my hard hat and everything else. I got to photograph. I spent a few days taking pictures, details, various views of the bridge and the administrative buildings and the toll booth to complete that project. And then the next one, which I had started, you can go to the next slide, Jim. This project was started actually in 2018 for PennDOT, Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. And last year, 2020, I went out, this is near Altoona, Pennsylvania, 3 times, pretty much on my own, because I knew the site, while PennDOT did reconstruction of this culvert, which was built in 1832. And it could not be, how to say, completely funded and tied up until I took the final photographs, which were taken in December after a light snow. But these were all 4x5. That's my primary format when I'm doing the documentary photography work. And they seem pretty straightforward, but they essentially encompass 3 things. It's elevation, where do you stand, north, south, east, west, you know, the alignment, details, construction details of, you know, the brickwork, stonework, whatever's important, and then the context views, like the one in the upper right, where you get an overall sense of, you know, how the project impacts, you know, the area, the region where it's been done. So, which is interesting. I don't have pictures of the before, but with the context view in the upper right, you could not stand there before they began construction. So this whole section down below that was, you know, dug out, trees taken down, just so they could bring everything to bear on fixing this culvert, 1832 culvert. So, and that work is going to come back. I have hope for that because they passed the infrastructure bill, which is tied to the highway bills. There's a lot of funding for this kind of work that's tied to reconstructing our bridges and highways. So I'm hoping I'll be back out in the field this coming year, completing some bids. I have 3 bids that have been sitting on the back burner since COVID. So I know the teaching's coming back. Now I'm just waiting for this. That's, you know, there are other things, the printing coming and going. I've always got a little bit of darkroom work that I'm doing for some other people, but I'll take any questions.
Sure. Thank you, David.
Sure.
We do have a couple of questions that came in for you. The first one asks, what has teaching photography taught you?
How would you say, to respect the innocence, the people who I would say, we think it's a difficult process, but it's also very forgiving. And if you, I would say, give the people the enthusiasm for the process and the appreciation for the magic behind it, even though we know it's all physics and chemistry, there's just say, the magic of seeing it come up in the tray. And that used to be kind of fundamental teaching, but now with the current generations on the collegiate level, they have no experience. Their whole visual picture taking, they think an iPhone picture is a photograph. Well, it's not a photograph, it's an iPhone picture. So just getting them to all of a sudden realize, you know, it's a challenge. And, you know, every semester almost, I have to change my approach, and the students keep me honest, and they keep me kind of up to date too. You know, I enjoy the conversations, just learning as much from them in many ways, they teach me as much as I teach them.
Okay, thank you. Another question asks you, how did you become a printer for other photographers?
Right out of when I graduated Mass Art, one of my instructors was setting up what you would call an atelier, a printer's workshop. And we specialized, he hired me as his first employee. Basically, he saw my skill set, I guess, at Mass Art and said, you know, do you want a job after you graduate? Would you like to, you know, work as a printer? And I would say he had studied, Gus, my mentor, so to speak, had studied with Minor White at MIT and was very well connected throughout the photographic world, new dealers in New York, Danny Wolf in New York, Peter McGill, Victor Schrager. So he had all these connections, and there were any number of photographers who we started printing for, doing portfolios, doing exhibition printing. And I was kind of naive still at that point and just loved the contact, because they say we go down and have lunch with Aaron Siskin, have lunch with Lee Friedlander, and you know, so it kind of an opportunity that was just presented to me. And running the galleries in New York, and people coming and working with them in person, it just, and I had the skills, I guess. I had the, you know, what's called the ability to do it, you know. And not that I was awestruck by it or anything like that. It was just a lot of fun. It was laid back, and it was just the two of us, and you know. And after a while, the business kind of arrangement didn't work out. I moved back to Pennsylvania, and I built up a clientele base, you know, on my own. And so I'll introduce myself at receptions and say, "Oh, you're the printer." So it's been fun, you know. And it's never been a business in a way. You know, I work rurally. I don't compete with the New York printers, or I didn't. You know, I was less expensive, more rewarding in the long run. But it's been fun. I learned a lot. And many of those clients were mentors in their own way. So I learned as much from, you know, people with the collective just talking about printing and things. So photography is an education for life.
Well put, well put. Thank you. And so that concludes our program. Again, Michael, Paul, David, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for joining us. If you have any additional questions or would like to learn more about Monalog Collective or are interested in future webinars, please contact monologuecollective.com or find us on Facebook and Instagram. Again, thank you and see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks.
you. So long, gentlemen.